Hi, my name is Savannah Martin, and I am presenting on Margaret Sanger. Most people today are familiar with Planned Parenthood and or some form of birth control, but do you know how they came about? Not a lot of people do. Born in 1879, Margaret Sanger is founder of Planned Parenthood. She was a believer in women's rights as well as a term called eugenics. Margaret, in an effort to make her life better than when she was a kid, went to college, had a family, and made something big of her life. Margaret Sanger, formerly Higgins, was the sixth child of 11 born to Anne and Michael Higgins. She was born on September 14, 1879, and died on September 6, 1966. Higgins and her Irish American family lived in Corning, New York, and were Roman Catholics. Throughout her life, Margaret's mother had many miscarriages that worsened her health, eventually leading to her death around ages 40 to 50 years. After her mother's passing, Margaret's father became a frequent drinker and was not an acceptable parent. In efforts to better her life, Margaret went to college and became a nurse. She soon after married her husband William Sanger in 1902 and had 3 children. In the early 1900s, Margaret was involved with women's rights and feminism. She believed in birth control, and she believed it was the woman's right to choose whether or not they wanted to take birth control. The laws frowned upon this, and she was forced to move out of the country, returning in 1915. 1 year later, in 1916, she opened her first Planned Parenthood clinic in Brownsville, New York. She joined the Liberal Club and New York Women's Socialist Party. She also strived to educate women on sex by holding campaigns and writing articles in newspapers.
But in my view, I believe that there should be no more babies, no more babies, no more babies.
Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, is lauded by feminists as a pioneer in the birth control movement. Planned Parenthood holds her in such esteem that it's named its highest award after her, the Margaret Sanger Award, bestowed on those who excel in pro-abortion activism.
I was told that I would receive this award. I admire Margaret Sanger enormously.
But those who laud Sanger leave out the fact that she was an out-and-out racist and eugenicist who actually inspired Adolf Hitler to implement her ideas in Germany and murder socially undesirable people. It would be birth control and abortion that would accomplish Sanger's goals in America. In her own words, birth control must lead ultimately to a cleaner race. She targeted the mentally handicapped and physically deformed, saying, "We should apply a stern and rigid policy of sterilization and segregation to that grade of population whose progeny is tainted or whose inheritance is such that objectionable traits may be transmitted to offspring." She believed in creating work camps for what she called the feeble-minded, who'd be shut away and forced to work for the rest of their lives, a vision that helped inspire Nazi concentration camps. In fact, not only did Sanger correspond with the head of Nazi Germany's eugenics program, Ernst Rudin, her magazine, The Birth Control Review, published his article in 1933, titled Eugenic Sterilization, an Urgent Need. Lothrop Stoddard, a prominent American eugenicist, praised the Nazis' racial policy for, in his words, weeding out the worst strains in the Germanic stock. He met personally with Hitler, and his writings on racial policy were featured in Nazi school textbooks. This same man sat on the board of Margaret Sanger's Birth Control League, which morphed into Planned Parenthood.
And do you believe there is such a thing as sin?
Well, I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world.
Sanger had no great love for African Americans, writing, "We don't want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population." Today, with African American women consisting of only 13% of the female population, while accounting for nearly 40% of all U.S. abortions, it seems Planned Parenthood continues to help carry out Sanger's morbid vision. Reporting for ChurchMilitant.com, I'm Christine Niles.
As I mentioned above, she was a believer in a term called eugenics. Eugenics is a term used to describe the transformation of heritable traits to your desire. Margaret wanted to make people who were valuable to society. A child with a disability was not in her idea of a valuable asset to the world. Many people believed that her intention was to eventually wipe out the African American race. Although she did not appreciate them, her goal was not to clear out their race.
Recent videos released by the Center for Medical Progress reveal Planned Parenthood's inhumane treatment of unborn children and its executives negotiating the sale of baby hearts, lungs, and livers. How did we get to this point? To understand present-day Planned Parenthood, we should understand Margaret Sanger, Planned Parenthood's founder and hero.
Margaret Sanger was a big proponent of negative eugenics, which was the viewpoint that you should weed out unfit people from the bloodline. So that would be encouraging people not to procreate if they were unfit, feeble-minded, had any kind of mental illness, and that also included forced sterilization.
Words like unfit and feeble-minded were used to describe not only the poor and mentally ill, but also to describe African Americans.
Margaret Sanger stated that birth control is nothing more or less than the facilitation of the process of weeding out the unfit, of preventing the birth of defectives or of those who will become defectives.
In 1921, Margaret Sanger founded the American Birth Control League. Its primary mission was to prevent uncontrolled procreation and establish a world program of birth control.
She states, knowledge of birth control is essentially moral. Its general, though prudent practice must lead to a higher individuality and ultimately to a cleaner race. Margaret Sanger stated that the most merciful thing that the large family does to one of its infant members is to kill it.
In 1939, Sanger wrote a letter to her eugenics colleague, Dr. Clarence Gamble, a member of the Birth Control Federation of America, in regards to setting up the Negro Project, a birth control clinic for African Americans.
She was speaking about serving what she called the Negro population, and in concluding this portion of the letter, she stated that we do not want word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population, and the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious members.
Sanger believed that having an African American minister on staff would ease the suspicion.
African American populations were considered some of these unfit members that should be weeded out. So in this letter, she discusses having African Americans serve other African Americans so they wouldn't be aware that they were seeking to terminate them, to exterminate them by the use of birth control and negative eugenics.
Sanger was quite fond of Dr. Ernst Ruden's work, director for the Society for Racial Hygiene. He would later go on to write Nazi Germany's sterilization laws. In 1933, she published his article, Eugenic Sterilization, an Urgent Need, which promoted programs to eliminate the unfit in order to create a super race. In the late 1930s and 40s, knowledge of Nazi atrocities made words like eugenics and population control unpopular in America. So in 1942, to distance itself in name, Margaret Sanger's American Birth Control League became Planned Parenthood. They weren't just being established in the U.S., it was global. A grim fact in American history was the forced sterilization of women in Puerto Rico. In 1936, sterilization programs spearheaded by the International Planned Parenthood Federation, with funding from the U.S. government, sterilized 1/3 of Puerto Rican women by 1968, making it the highest proportion of childbearing age persons sterilized in the world. And today,
Planned Parenthood facilities are generally located in low-income areas which are heavily populated with minorities, and a lot of times they seek to reach those minorities to help them with reproductive rights, they say, with birth control and largely abortion.
Independent studies have concluded that nearly 80% of Planned Parenthood facilities are set up in minority communities. It's no wonder abortion is the leading cause of death among African Americans, higher than all other causes combined. mounting evidence against Planned Parenthood's beginning to today continues to fuel public outcry.
The American people should seek to immediately defund Planned Parenthood so that our own tax dollars don't go to support this organization who has been exposed to be lying to the American people for many years, for committing these egregious acts against the youngest children among us. They should be immediately defunded.
As founder of the American Birth Control League, which
To conclude, Margaret Sanger was a women's rights activist, as well as a feminist. Despite her childhood, Margaret grew up and made a life for herself by having a family, founding Planned Parenthood, and educating women on sex. Although she has had many contradictions, Margaret's primary goal was to, in her opinion, make a better place.